In 1485, a Hungarian king rode through the gates of Vienna. Not the Habsburgs, not the Holy Roman Empire, not any of the powers that would spend the next 4 centuries fighting over that city. A king from Hungary, a country most of Europe had written off as a frontier buffer against the Ottomans. He rode at the head of 8,000 soldiers in blackened armor, and behind him the Holy Roman Emperor was already 3 cities away, still running. The army that did this was not built on knights and peasant levies like every other force in Europe. It was built by a 14-year-old who had been reading Julius Caesar and decided that every army around him was doing it wrong. And the story of what he built and what killed it is one of the most consequential military decisions in European history. Matthias Corvinus came to the throne of Hungary in 1458 at age 14. His father was John Hunyadi, the general who had spent his career throwing back Ottoman advances into Central Europe. A self-made man who had risen from the minor nobility to become the most feared commander in the region. Matthias grew up watching his father work. He understood early what made armies break and what made them whole. He also read obsessively Caesar, Roman military history, the organization of the legions, the way Rome had solved a problem that every king in medieval Europe was still losing to. Picture a boy in a castle in Transylvania, circling passages in Latin about legions that had been dead for 1,000 years, noting what still worked, asking why nobody had tried it again. The problem was simple. A medieval king needed soldiers. He called on his nobles. The nobles called on their peasants. The peasants put down their tools, picked up whatever weapons they owned, and marched. For 2 weeks, maximum. Then the campaign ended and everyone went home. Back to the farms, back to the bakeries, back to whatever they were doing before the king needed them. These were not soldiers. They were farmers with swords and a deadline. No unified training, no institutional knowledge that carried from one campaign to the next, no permanent command structure. Every war started from zero. Caesar had understood this 14 centuries earlier. An army that goes home is not an army. It is a crowd with weapons that you have to reassemble every time someone threatens you. Matthias read that, understood it completely, then spent the first years of his reign building the financial base to fix it. He overhauled the Hungarian tax system, reformed the currency, created a revenue base stable enough to pay full-time soldiers year-round. When the Hungarian nobility revolted against the new taxes, Matthias sent the Black Army to suppress the revolt, the same army that taxes were funding. It was the most efficient political statement of the 15th century. You will pay for this army, and here is the army to make sure you do. What he built was unlike anything operating in Europe at the time. Full-time mercenaries. Their sole occupation was warfare, farming in summer and fighting in autumn. Fighting, always. They were paid 4 to 5 times what the average peasant earned, which meant the men who joined were experienced soldiers looking for a profession, not conscripts looking to survive the harvest. Promoted on performance, not birth, not connection. A man who performed well in the Black Army moved up. A man who did not was replaced. This sounds obvious. In the 15th century, it was revolutionary. The structure came directly from Caesar. Heavy cavalry as the hammer. Armored knights who could smash through an enemy line and break its center. But Matthias added something Caesar never had: the hussar. Light cavalry, Serbian in origin, adapted from the steppe tactics of Eastern Europe. 25 riders per unit, led by a captain. Lighter armor, curved sabers, built for speed where the heavy cavalry was built for impact. Where the heavy cavalry was a wall, the hussar was a blade. He did not charge lines. He found the gap, hit the flank, ran down the supply trains, appeared where he was not expected, and was gone before the answer arrived. The enemy committed their cavalry to stop the heavy charge. The hussars were already behind them. And underneath all of it, the firearm. 1 in 4 soldiers in the Black Army carried an arquebus. 1 in 4. At a time when Western European armies were still debating whether gunpowder weapons were worth the cost, Matthias had already made them standard infantry equipment. The arquebus soldiers stood behind pavises, large wooden shields, firing through gaps while the armored infantry held the line in front of them. The Ottomans used massed archery and infantry charges. Their cavalry was fast and their numbers enormous. But their cavalry had no armor that could stop a heavy charge, and their infantry had no answer for men firing from behind a wooden wall. Matthias knew this. He had studied enough battles to know exactly where the scene was, and he built an army designed to find it every time. 1479. The Battle of Breadfield in Transylvania. A massive Ottoman raiding force, one of the largest sent into Hungarian territory, moves deep into Transylvania. Tens of thousands of men. The strategy had worked before. Come in fast, take what you can, be gone before a proper army can respond. General Pál Kinizsi intercepted them with the Black Army. The Ottomans outnumbered the Hungarians significantly. It did not matter. The Black Army's combined formation did exactly what it was designed to do. Infantry held the center behind their pavises, arquebuses fired in controlled volleys, the Ottoman cavalry pressed in, and when they were fully committed, Kinizsi led the heavy cavalry into the flank. The Ottoman force broke, thousands dead on the field. The Ottoman raiding strategy into Transylvania effectively ended that day. As for Kinizsi, accounts from the battle say he was found afterwards hold a dead Ottoman soldier in his teeth while dancing a victory celebration. Whether that is exactly true is debatable. Whether Kinizsi was the kind of man capable of it is not. But the battle that defined what the Black Army actually was, the battle that announced it to all of Europe, was not against the Ottomans. It was against the most powerful Christian ruler on the continent. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III had a problem with Matthias. Specifically, he owed him money from a treaty, and he had decided not to pay. Matthias's solution was to take Austria instead. 3 campaigns, 5 years, each one pushing deeper into Habsburg territory. Castles falling, towns occupied, the empire's eastern lands strangled piece by piece. Medic responded by moving his court. Matthias moved his army. In January of 1485, the Black Army encircled Vienna, the Habsburg capital, the center of the Holy Roman Empire, a city that had never fallen to an outside force. The siege lasted 5 months. Matthias brought up artillery, systematically reduced the outer defenses, cut the city off from supply or relief. Frederick had already fled, first to Vienna Neustadt, then to Graz, then to Linz. The Holy Roman Emperor, the man who held the most powerful title in Christendom, the ruler whose dynasty would go on to dominate Europe for 3 more centuries, running through his own cities. While a Hungarian king unpacked his belongings in the imperial capital, the most powerful monarch in Christian Europe was retreating across his own territory while a Hungarian king methodically dismantled his capital. On the 1st of June, 1485, the gates of Vienna opened. Matthias Corvinus rode through them at the head of 8,000 veterans in blackened armor. He moved the Hungarian royal court into the city, summoned the Austrian estates, and made them swear loyalty to him. Then he kept going. Vienna Neustadt fell, then more of Lower Austria, then Styria and Carinthia. Frederick kept running. By the end of his campaigns, Matthias controlled Hungary, Austria, Moravia, Silesia, and both Lusatias, a Central European empire carved out over 30 years by one professional army. At Vienna in 1485, Matthias reviewed the Black Army in full parade. 28,000 soldiers, 20,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry, river fleet on the Danube. They performed the formations Matthias had designed. The triangle, the square, the wedge made a cape. And then the scorpion. Heavy cavalry as the claws, light hussars flanking out, infantry and artillery making up the body. The scorpion was the signature formation of the Black Army, every part of the army doing its specific job simultaneously. The claws fixing the enemy, the flanks cutting around, the body advancing once the line broke. Roman combined arms tactics, rebuilt in the 15th century by a man who had learned them from a book before he was old enough to shave. Matthias Corvinus died in Vienna in April of 1490. He was 47. A stroke, no warning. He left no legitimate heir. The Hungarian nobility met to choose a new king. They had spent 30 years being taxed by Matthias, disciplined by Matthias, occasionally suppressed by the army Matthias built to fund itself. They were not looking for another Matthias. They found Vladislaus, a Polish prince, mild, agreeable, already known in Bohemia for approving every decision the nobles put in front of him without argument. His Hungarian nickname would become Dobrze László, King Very Well, because whatever anyone asked him to sign, he signed. He was exactly what the Hungarian nobility had been waiting for. Vladislaus inherited a nearly empty treasury. The Black Army cost 400,000 florins a year. Matthias's total income had been around 650,000 in a good year. There was no way to fund the army without the tax system Matthias had built. The nobility immediately cut taxes by 70 to 80%. May 2 off, no taxes, no money. No money, no army. The Black Army went unpaid. Unpaid mercenaries are not soldiers waiting patiently for a resolution. They are armed professionals with no particular loyalty to anyone who stopped paying them. The Black Army began doing what unpaid armies have always done. They started taking what they were owed. From the villages of the kingdom they had been built to protect. From the churches and manors of the nobles who had voted to stop paying them. Vladislaus sent troops to stop the plundering. The troops he sent were led by Pál Kinizsi, the same general who had danced on the Ottoman dead at Breadfield, who had built his career inside the Black Army. Kinizsi hunted down his own men, the general who had broken the Ottomans at Breadfield, who had held a dead enemy in his teeth and danced, who owed everything he was to the Black Army, sent to finish it off because a new king did not want to pay the bill. The remaining Black Army soldiers were escorted to Buda, officially disbanded, released abroad on a single condition. They were never to return and claim the wages they were still owed. The men who had taken Vienna were dismissed without payment and told to leave. Some refused to accept this quietly. A group of former Black Army soldiers confronted a Habsburg count on a road in Lower Austria in 1493, trying to collect what they were owed. They were killed. The Black Army ended not in a battle, not against the Ottomans, not against the Habsburgs. It ended in a skirmish over unpaid wages on a road in Austria. The consequences were not immediate. They took 36 years to arrive. Without the Black Army, Hungary went back to the feudal levy system. Nobles and peasants, farmers with swords and a deadline. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent had not stopped expanding. It had simply been held in place by the presence of an army that no longer existed. In 1526, at the Battle of Mohacs, a Hungarian army met a full Ottoman invasion force. The battle lasted 2 hours. The Hungarian king died in the rout. 2 archbishops, 7 bishops, most of the Hungarian nobility who had voted to cut the taxes that paid the Black Army. The king's body was found weeks later in a marsh, stripped, face down in the mud, still wearing his armor. The country that had held the Ottomans at arm's length for decades, that had taken Vienna, that had fielded the finest army in Europe, was destroyed in a single afternoon. 2 centuries of Ottoman occupation followed. Matthias Corvinus understood something almost no one around him did. A professional army is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. You pay for it continuously, or you pay for its absence catastrophically. The Black Army cost money every year, whether there was a war or not. That was the point. A teenage king read Julius Caesar and understood that Rome's legions were permanent because Rome's enemies were permanent. His successors read the tax bills and understood nothing at all. 32 years of one man's vision. 200 years of what came after. The bill for disbanding the Black Army was paid in full, just not by the people who made the decision. Ash and iron. Every week, the story's history kept to itself. Find us on YouTube and Facebook.